unnoticed by the American public. As the trial unfolded, Draytell listened with alarm as prosecutors began to sketch a portrait of a largely unknown foe determined to wage war against America. It was a global terrorism network they called Al-Qaeda. And while El Haga and 3 other men sat in the dock, it became clear that something much bigger was on trial, though few people realized it at the time. Draytell was just a block away from the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001, when the prosecutor's nightmare scenario, a terrorist attack on the continental United States, came true. He heard the loud scream of a jet engine and the explosion on impact. His apartment building literally shook. He craned his neck from the window of his Battery Park City apartment to see flames licking the upper floors of the North Tower. He watched as ribbons of steel and sheets of paper rained down on the ground below. And while the rest of the world may have hoped that this was some sort of pilot error or terrible mistake, Draytell's mind immediately arrived at another place. They bombed the World Trade Center again, he told himself, switching on the television. In the days after the embassy bombing trial, Draytell's legal practice had changed. He became a kind of go-to guy for terror defendants. He locked horns with the government in one of its signature domestic terrorism cases against the North Texas-based Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development. The Bush administration accused the group of illegally raising and laundering tens of millions of dollars to Hamas, a U.S.-designated terrorist organization. He was the defense attorney for David Hicks, the so-called Australian Taliban, in United States v. David Hicks. Hicks had been detained as an enemy combatant at Guantanamo Bay since 2001, accused of fighting for the Taliban and Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Draytell had been prepared to defend Hicks before a U.S. military commission when his effort was cut short. The Supreme Court ruled in 2006 that the Commission's tribunal process was unconstitutional. He had been one of the lead attorneys, alongside the ACLU, in suing the government over the USA Patriot Act provisions that broadened investigators' powers, allowing them to set up secret wiretaps after securing permission from a special court. All these cases had made Draytell a resident expert on terror in the 21st century. And consequently, Draytell became, in a very real sense, the Leonard Zelig of such litigation. Just like the Woody Allen character who found himself standing next to Babe Ruth or Winston Churchill at some turning point in history, Draytell appeared at almost every key moment of America's war on terror, blinking against the Klieg lights. So it was rather ironic that when the New York Times broke one of the biggest stories about civil liberties in post-9/11 America, that President Bush had sidestepped the law and hadn't bothered to secure warrants for a roster of domestic wiretaps, Draytell was one of the last to know. The December 16, 2005 front-page story remained tucked and unread in his briefcase until late that evening. Draytell had returned to his downtown Manhattan apartment, opened a bag full of take-out Chinese, and started reading through the day's headlines. He stopped in mid-chew when he read the 24-point type on the lead story. Bush lets U.S. spy on callers without courts. In the months after 9/11, Times journalists James Risen and Eric Lichtblau reported President Bush had signed an executive order allowing the National Security Agency to eavesdrop on international telephone calls and to monitor the international email messages of people inside the United States. The program was said to track so-called dirty numbers, phone lines that might have had links, however tangential, to Al-Qaeda. But there was no telling who else was inadvertently picked up in that sweep. It wasn't the suggestion of secret wiretaps that rattled Draytell. That had been done in the past after securing permission from a special court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, created for just that purpose. It was that this time the process of getting warrants, that singular check on the power to determine whose phone calls and emails would remain private and whose would be monitored,